Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished entrepreneur, a startup guru from Melbourne, Australia, Sangeeta Mulchandani. Sangeeta, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ashutosh.
Sangeeta is the founder of Jumpstart Studio. She's a third-generation entrepreneur. After years in the senior corporate role, she left to build her own startups and become a business strategy mentor, coach, trainer, and speaker. Sangeeta is the co-founder of the Australian Professionals of Color, and she's an author. And all of you know, I'm very, very partial to authors. So she's an author of a book titled Start Right. So Sangeeta, before we talk about Jumpstart, tell me about your own journey from the corporate world to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, sure. So I spent about 15 years in the corporates. My career started, I was an IT graduate when I started, but right after my bachelor's degree, I moved to Africa, and I lived in Nigeria for a couple of years. And back then, it was 2006, it was really hard for me to find an IT job in Africa, in Lagos. And so I stumbled into a finance role. So my journey started back then there with Lufthansa Airlines. And since then, I've sort of lived and worked in many different countries. I've traveled across the world. I've worked across 6 continents. And as I was climbing the corporate ladder, working across airlines, energy, banking, it was really interesting that I kept climbing the corporate ladder and I kept achieving everything that I ever wanted to achieve, but I still wasn't happy. I still wasn't satisfied. And so for me, I think the switch in my head had changed because for the longest time in those 15 years, success to me was all about my growth and my personal success. Whereas I think around about 2016, there was sort of a switch in my brain somehow. I don't know what it is, but it was just something that that sort of switched. And for me, happiness became all about other people and seeing other people succeed. And it was no longer just my success that made me happy or satisfied. And so in a way, I sort of knew I will always go into entrepreneurship because I come from a lineage of entrepreneurs. My grandparents are entrepreneurs. Both my parents are entrepreneurs. And so I was the first one to go into a corporate career. So for me to switch from that into entrepreneurship was a calling I knew was going to come at some point. And so as everybody who gets very institutionalized with a job and being an employee, there are a lot of fears to jump out of corporate and start your own businesses. And I had the same. So, I definitely had a lot of fears, even though I'd grown up watching businesses, I'd grown up seeing my parents build businesses and helping them in their businesses. So in 2019, I finally just decided enough was enough. I had to do something about this itch. And so I went on to do my second master's degree in entrepreneurship at Melbourne Uni. And again, I was playing it safe because I was like, well, if I don't end up building businesses out of this, then, at least I get a master's degree. I have a fallback position, right? So I was being as risk averse as I could as an entrepreneur. But I think that 1 year really changed my life. The course was designed to help you build businesses hands-on. And so I started a travel business. I failed at that one. And then I started a food business, which got shelved because of COVID. And then I went back to my corporate because I still had my corporate job. I'd just taken a break from work. And so when I went back to my corporate job, I felt like I had outgrown it. I'd gone and built businesses and made revenue. And, back in the corporate, everybody around me was still doing exactly the same thing they were doing 12 months ago. And so that no longer excited me. And so I felt like I had outgrown that whole space. And so in the middle of the pandemic, my next business started. And throughout the pandemic, I kept building a few different businesses. And today I run 4 businesses in different areas and different arenas, but they're all with the purpose of helping either founders and entrepreneurs or helping corporate professionals. All my businesses sort of aim towards those 2 purposes.
Fascinating. And what about Jumpstart Studio? What are you doing at Jumpstart Studio?
Yeah, sure. So Jumpstart Studio, again, was born in the middle of the pandemic. And it started off with me doing a lot of pro bono work, pretty much working with a lot of organizations and universities here in Australia that run incubator programs and pre-accelerator programs for early stage startups.
Mm.
And so I would go in as a coach and a mentor because I had the corporate experience and I had some startup experience, and I could sort of go in and help people with a lot of different areas. And as I was doing that, I started finding that there's a lot of them that needed that additional help and that additional push. And the vision, I suppose, for Jumpstart Studio was also this one-stop shop where corporate professionals, and I started speaking to a lot of people who were like, Sangeeta, we want to do what you're doing. Like, you know, they would come to me and say, how did you make the switch? How did you move out of an employee role and, you know, in entrepreneurship? And that's sort of where Jumpstart Studio was born, really to help people turn their business ideas into reality and move from being just in that ideation zone to then actually taking action and building something effective, testing their ideas and getting out there in the market. And then also then liaising with the other providers possible, like legal, accounting, all of those.
Right. Well said. And based on your own experience, Sangeeta, what are some of the common challenges that a lot of early stage startups face?
Yeah, I mean, if they're founders who've already started their business and they're in the very early stages, there's a lot of things that I think people face. The first thing is, yes, they've taken the leap and they've gone into it, but you know, after a period of time, they realize that they've really bitten off more than they can chew.
Right.
And so very often the challenge is momentum and sustaining that momentum and keeping going, keeping on your track, right? So for a lot of people, it starts with an idea. It starts with this light bulb moment, and they're like, oh my God, I've got this brilliant idea. I've got to do something about it. I've got to do something about it. And then they go and start building something. But very soon they lose track or they lose momentum because of multiple things, because they don't understand who they're building for. They don't understand what is the final outcome. They don't understand the breadth and depth of work they need to do across finance, accounting, marketing, legal. Like as a founder, you have to be across it all. And it's not a role you're playing anymore as an employee. So that becomes a big challenge for a lot of early stage founders. And they end up building things that don't work. And then they end up feeling like they have to go back to what they were doing before.
Right. Well said. And, before we go further, can you share a story of a startup that you have mentored that has gone on to achieve some serious success? I don't want any names, of course.
I'm happy to name.
Okay, then I'm absolutely. Yeah.
Of course, I think there's some really good stories that I can share, but the one that comes to mind straight away is a team of 3 sort of Indian men who I coached when they were here in Australia. So they started their business in Australia. And they sort of had gone through an accelerator program before. The business is called Social Trait AI, AI business. And they came to me through one of the coaching programs that I was doing at RMIT called Launch Hub. So they had already been through a program together before, and then this was a second program that they were doing, and I was their assigned coach and mentor. And I still remember the first meeting that they came to, and they came to me and they said, Sangeeta, we have this whole thing, but we're not really sure. We don't think this is going to work. We've been given feedback before that this is, there's more work that needs to be done. This won't cut it. And I was like, okay, let's see what you have. And so they gave me a lot of presentations, and, they showed me the financials. They showed me a lot of things. And I looked at a lot of that stuff and I thought, okay, all this is good. Give me a demo of the product. I want to see what you have. Right. And so when they demoed the product, to me, it was like I had so many aha moments watching them in that. And I was like, okay, you guys are ready for market right now. They were like, what? No, this is contrary to all the feedback we've been given. And so I think it's just sort of, sometimes it's just building confidence in founders and sort of, being that, person that pushes them and says, you can do it, right? And as a coach, that's usually what our job is. And so what was really good is from then, and this was sort of maybe about 12 months ago, is when I met them. And in 12 months since then, they have gone ahead and, they completed the program. They got the funding of the program as well. They're one of the top teams to get the funding.
Mhm.
And on the back of that, then what happened is we were having drinks celebrating their funding. And I said, in the next 1 year, I want to see you in Silicon Valley.
Mhm.
And they were like, no way, like we can't get there, right? And within 6 months, they were accepted into the Berkeley Skydeck program.
Wow.
They were given their first round of funding, and they've successfully now completed that program just a couple of weeks ago. And they're also raising another round of funding of $3 million. So
Wonderful.
it's just been, step by step,
Mm.
they've just sort of seen massive success. And I think
Fascinating.
it's a testament to the founders.
Absolutely fascinating. Amazing. My next question to you, Sangeeta, is, there's often a big dilemma that founders face, that should we get a founder? Should we get a co-founder? So my question is, how can startups find the right co-founder and build the right team?
Yeah, $1 million question, Ashutosh. But so finding the right co-founder, I think, I've had a few co-founders through my journey as well. And if I reflect back on that experience, to me, I think it's really the first and fundamentally aligning on the vision and what you're trying to achieve. If you're not both sort of doing this for the cause and in it for the cause, I think it can become very tricky. So in your conversations, in meeting people and trying to find the right co-founder, the first thing is to understand is, how do you align on the vision? The second thing that you need to be aligned on is your values. And I know values usually are taken quite lightly, but to be honest, values are so important in a business, and alignment of values are super important as well. Because very often as human beings, we do things differently. We all have different ways of doing things. But as long as we are aligned on the values as co-founders, as long as you're aligned on the vision as co-founders, I think that is very essential when you're looking for a co-founder. Building a team, that's a whole nother book that I've been asked about a lot of times, and which I will write eventually. But I think building a team takes a lot of time and patience. And again, alignment to vision and values is a non-negotiable. Beyond that, I think is also, there's so many other things to build culture within teams and to drive the teams. I think there's so much more that goes into it. But if there was a starting point that I would recommend, it'll be aligning vision and values and understanding why people are here doing this with you, and what's in it for you and what's in it for them. I think starting there is very important.
Wonderful. And my next question to you is on funding. This has often been asked, and the $1 million question is, should a founder bootstrap as long as possible or raise money whenever it's available? I'd love to get your perspective.
I'm a big fan of bootstrapping as long as you can. However, it really depends on the kind of business you're building, the kind of market you're in, and the kind of environment you're in. In today's environment, funding is not very easy to come across because multiple countries are going through their recessions, and so funding is tight. And so if as a company you are not geared for bootstrapping and you're fully dependent on funding, this is probably not the best time for you, right? So that's why I'm a big fan of being able to bootstrap and being able to call the shots as to when you should be funding and not, rather than relying on the funding cycles to dictate your growth. And so that's why bootstrapping, I think, would be my default position. However, having said that, there are industries, specifically in tech, for example, AI, and the technologies that are coming out now with virtual reality and all of those things. It's very hard to bootstrap because you need lots of funding to be able to run those levels of systems and processes to be able to scale. And so I would say bootstrap until you can. And then there's always a right time in every business to fund. But if funding is available and you don't really need it, you can bootstrap. Don't fall into the temptation of the funding is my point.
Well said. Great response. Thank you. You also a few minutes back spoke about culture. Now that's something which a lot of founders have asked me. So my question to you is, how can founders foster a strong culture from the very beginning?
It's a very tricky one, Ashutosh. And I think culture is very different in different aspects. But I think culture is not something that just comes from the founder. I think culture is something that needs to be owned by everybody in the organization. And I've seen this in large organizations as much as I've seen it in startups as well. Culture is not just a top-down thing. It's something that needs to be embodied by everybody.
Correct.
And so the starting point is definitely vision and values. But I think communication is one of the biggest drivers of culture. As long as people feel like their communication within the organization is transparent, it's very two-way, it's not one way, it's not, directional, but it's sort of more collegiate. It's people collaborating together. I think it's, at the end of the day, there's this great quote by Maya Angelou. It's not about what you what you say to people that matters. It's about how you make them feel that matters at the end of the day, right? So at the end of the day, if people feel like they belong, feel like they're heard and they're listened to and respected, I think people are happy to work for you. And that's a great culture to even start with for startups. A lot of people try to have a lot of fancy workplace things and, we're going to have these games tables. And I think Google has created this whole culture of having, great spaces for people and things like that. And those are great. Like if you have the money to be able to build some of those luxuries for your staff, it's great. But I think at the fundamental level, it's about how you make them feel when they work with you and how much they feel like they're heard and listened to and respected.
Yeah, well said. My next question is on work-life balance. A lot of startup founders who speak to me say that, work is difficult. We don't get time for family. We burn out very quickly. What are your perspectives?
Yeah, I think having faced burnout myself in the corporate life, I think work-life balance is quite a concept that comes from that angle. To me, I think work is part of life. And, just like we eat, sleep, exercise, we need to work as well. And, for the money or not for the money, but I think at least for our own sanity and for being able to give back into the society for our own self-actualization needs, it's very important to be able to work. But having said that, I think being conscious that, you don't eat all day, you don't sleep all day, you don't exercise all day. Similarly, you don't need to be working all day around the clock. And as long as you can understand that it's part of life and it's something that we all need as a basic necessity. But I think it's very real burnout. And I think one of the biggest things that founders need to sort of understand when they get into entrepreneurship is it will consume your life. Because it's a passion, right? It comes from passion. It's driven by passion. You don't become an entrepreneur if you aren't passionate about what you're doing and what you're building. But to be able to contain that passion and to be able to sort of use that passion to drive the right behaviors for yourself is important. Because at the end of the day, if you're burnt out and if your health is not prioritized, if your sleep routines are not prioritized, if your family is not prioritized, you will lose a lot in the pursuit of entrepreneurship and in the pursuit of building a business. And that should not, I think that has been set as a benchmark for a long time by many, many founders, but that is not the only way to success or only path to success. And I think recognizing that and being cognizant and working on, with that in mind, I think is very important.
Well said. So Sangeeta, I have time for two more questions, and I want to move to your book now. You're the author of a book titled Start Right. I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Sangeeta Mulchandani's book, Start Right, on Amazon. I'll go and check it out myself. Tell me about your book and what was your hypothesis when you wrote it?
Yeah. So as I was, so I think it's twofold. One was when I was coaching and mentoring a lot of people, I was just answering the same questions over and over again for people. And so for me, I wanted to have a resource that I can give them that they can refer to again and again, even if I'm not in front of them telling them things, right? So that was one main motivation of creating the book as a resource for early stage founders, because at the early stage, irrespective of which industry you're in, irrespective of what you're trying to build, the fundamentals of building a business are very similar and pretty much, in most industries, it's exactly the same thing that you need to do at a very, very early stage.
Mhm.
And so that's where the book is aimed, is for these very early stage founders. The second piece was also there were founders that I was talking to that had gone into the journey a year or two in, and they were now starting to struggle. And they were like, what do I do now? And so the book was also for those people to help them see, okay, go back and read the book and reflect. Have you taken the right steps? And if you haven't, then how can you actually, go back and unwind some of the stuff and redo it again, rather than just putting up your hand and saying, I give up. So it was also to save them from giving up on their dreams.
Correct. Well said. And my last question to you, Sangeeta, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your own amazing understanding of entrepreneurship, startups, where we work with so many different founders, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away?
3 lessons. I think there's a framework that I work on with founders, which I call the 3 pillars of success, and that is mindset, strategy, and execution. And every business needs these 3 things. My book is also based on this framework of mindset, strategy, and execution. And while all the 3 are super important, one of the biggest things that I have learned personally on my own journey, but also coaching and mentoring other startups on their journey, I have found that mindset is probably the most important thing, and no prizes for guessing it, right? Because everything starts in your mind. As long as your mindset is sound, you will be able to find success in your business. And so the one lesson that I would probably leave you with is you've got to sort of keep working on that mindset all throughout the journey. It's not a one-time done and set thing. It happens throughout the journey. But doing it in a very cognizant way, in a very aware manner, really helps you then build on the strengths and build on those things. So execution is not everything, strategy is not everything, mindset is not everything, but start with the mindset. All the 3 have to work together, but your mindset is the most important thing. So keep that in mind, and always sort of keep checking yourself if you're going into negative spirals, if you're going into into areas in your head where you shouldn't be going in. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is it's very important to recognize that entrepreneurship is a journey. It's not a destination. And so take your time. You don't have to achieve it today or tomorrow, and nobody is judging you as to when you achieve it or when you don't.
Correct.
And people often talk about failures in entrepreneurship, but in reality, there are no failures in entrepreneurship. There's only learnings. So as long as you keep learning, you are on the journey, and you can keep learning your entire life. So just keep learning and keep moving ahead. Don't let negative circumstances stop you from it. And the third thing I would say is every entrepreneur is not an entrepreneur by himself. There is an army of people that need to be behind you for you to be successful. This can be your family, this can be your friends, this can be your business partners, this can be your team, this can be your stakeholders. So there's a heap of people that come into making your business successful. So it's not all about you. It is about them as much as it is about you. And it is about your customers more than anything else. And to be able to sort of keep all that in mind, you do need to have the right support systems in place for yourself. And by that, I mean, get yourself a coach, get yourself a mentor, get yourself people who have walked this path before and can show you and, caution you about the pitfalls on the journey. And so to guarantee your own success, you've got to bring this whole army of people along with you, and you've got to have somebody who leads the way for you as well. So don't feel like you have to do it alone and all on your own.
Well said. And on that note, Sangeeta, and your 3 amazing lessons, work on your mindset, because that is what you have to be cognizant about throughout your journey. Second, you said entrepreneurship is a journey, not a destination. Third, you talked about cannot do it alone, because lots of other people are involved. Get support, get people in your corner, so to speak. You also spoke about mindset, strategy, and execution, and how important all these 3 pillars are. Thank you for speaking to me about your journey. Thank you for speaking about so many different aspects of entrepreneurship for startup founders. And finally, thank you for speaking to me about your book, start right. Thank you again and good luck.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.